Hello and welcome. This channel is about Aldsidu, historical Old Ways heathenry, especially that of the Germanic tribes, and especially that of the Saxons. Today's discussion is going to be on the Saxon Wars. And honestly, this is the most important history that I'm covering today, literally the most important historical event of Saxon heathenry's history. So let us talk about Charlemagne, in German, Karl der Grosse, or as I like to say, Karl der Kleine. But a war raged between the Christian Franks and the heathen Saxons for 33 years between 772 and 804 of the Common Era. The war was called the Saxon Wars, and the Christian Franks recorded a year-by-year summary of their attacks on the heathen Saxons in Saxony. The Royal Frankish Annals state the following in their entry for the year 775 of the Common Era. While the King Charlemagne spent the winter at the villa of Quierzy, he decided to attack the treacherous and treaty-breaking tribe of the Saxons, and to persist in this war until they were either defeated and forced to accept the Christian religion or be entirely exterminated. Now, I can't state enough. Charlemagne is known as the founder of the First Reich, which lasted 1,000 years. And his Reich was bent on genocide for those who did not just the Saxons, but for others, especially the Frisians, who often get forgotten. Saxons' northwest neighbors. It was convert or die with Charlemagne. So where was Old Saxony? As you see in this map, Saxony is northern Germany. This is where the historical heathen Saxons lived. The majority of the heathen Saxons did not go to Angleland. Most of them stayed in Saxony. A few of them did go, but the vast majority stayed in Saxony, and Saxony was its own heathen nation for a long time. The Franks were the neighbors to the south. They owned these territories: Aquitaine, Neustria, and Austria. And of course, they had conquered Swabia. So, and here's another JPEG of heathen Old Saxony. So Widukind is the true Saxon hero. He is Charlemagne's adversary. Widukind became the leader of the heathen Saxons during the Saxon Wars. And the Saxon Wars are clearly a war of forced Christianization and a war with a heathen hero, Widukind. The Saxon struggle was one of honor, a call to all Saxon heathens to live honorably and to continue the ways of our ancestors, no matter the cost. In 772 of the Common Era, the Saxon nobles were offered by Charlemagne a peaceful solution. You can convert and you can rule in Charlemagne's name over the peasants in Saxony, ending the heathen all-thing that ruled Saxony, replacing it with monarchical Christian rule. Widukind was the only noble to decline. Widukind wished to remain heathen for far more than enriching himself with Christian gold. Widukind was an ally to the Danes, the Saxon neighbors to the north, and the Saxon neighbors, the Danes, offered Widukind assistance in fighting the Christian Franks. Also, Widukind married the daughter of the Danish king Siegfried. So he married Siegfried's daughter, Geva of Westfold. Widukind is a true heathen hero. So Frankish writings like Einhard, Charlemagne's biographer, blame the Saxons for beginning the Saxon Wars, claiming that they constantly raided churches in Francia. However, these raids are not mentioned in the Royal Frankish Annals. The Royal Frankish Annals record the Franks as the first to attack in 772. While the Franks leave out their attack of Thunar's well from their record, the archaeological record clearly proves that the Franks attacked Sigiberg, or Seeberg first, modern Hohenseeberg. This is the site of Thunar's well. After Thunar's well was taken, the Franks next attacked the Irminsul. Now, I have a video on Thunar's well with many pictures on location, and I was there with a Saxon heathen and professional archaeologist and PhD candidate, Sven Nipschild, who is a professional archaeologist who has been involved in excavations in historical heathen Saxony. So I would definitely recommend checking out that video. But the Royal Frankish Annals record the beginning of the Saxon Wars with this entry in the year 772 AD or CE. The most gracious Lord King Charles, Charlemagne, then held an assembly at Worms. From Worms he marched into Saxony. Capturing the hill fort at Eresburg, he proceeded as far as the Irminsul, destroyed the citadel, and carried away the gold and silver he found. A great drought occurred so that there was no water in the place where the Irminsul stood. The glorious king wished to remain there 2 or 3 days in order to destroy the temple completely, but they had no water. Now, if I were to continue this quote, an angel comes and produces a Christian miracle and ends the drought and provides water, a miraculous flow of water. I certainly believe that that's propaganda. But what isn't propaganda is why would the Franks lie that it took 2 or 3 days to destroy the temple at the Irminsul? So this means that the Irminsul wasn't a big tree like you see here, at least it probably wasn't. It more likely was a giant godpole. And I do have a video on the historical Saxon Irminsul, also with Saxon heathen archaeologist Sven Nipschild. So I recommend you guys checking that out. But the picture shows a tree that they're chopping down. But most likely this was a giant godpole with a temple. And there was gold and silver found there. And obviously this is a big deal because if you want to entice your army to continue fighting heathens and risk your lives, what better way but to take gold and silver from the heathens and pay them? And things like this did inspire the Viking raids. You know, most historians don't say that things like this inspired the Viking raids, but these raids happened first. Donar's Oak of the Chatti was destroyed, and the gold and silver was taken from there, just as it was from the Irminsul. And then why do the Vikings attack by sea, hit and run raids? The Franks had the best cavalry in the world, but the Franks did not have the best navy in the world. The Danes far outclassed them. Just as Danish shield walls didn't stand to cavalry charges, well, the Franks were no match at sea for the Vikings. So those hit and run raids, jumping out of a boat, sacking a monastery, stealing the gold and silver found there, was an absolute reaction to the destruction of places like the Irminsul. And after the Saxons were defeated, the Frankish sources record a baptismal vow forced on the Saxons. This is the literal vow, though I translated it into English. But do you forsake the devil? The respondent would say in red, I forsake the devil. The priest would say in white, and all devil worship. And the Saxon would be forced to say, and I forsake all devil worship, and all devil works. And I forsake all devil works and words, Thunar, Woden, and Sasnoth, and all the demons which are their comrades. Do you believe in God, the all-powerful Father? I believe in God, the all-powerful Father. Do you believe in Christ, God's Son? I believe in Christ, God's Son. Do you believe in the Holy Ghost? I believe in the Holy Ghost. So this was the actual baptismal vow that the Frankish monks used to force on the Saxons when they were defeated. Here's a picture of the historical location of where the Irminsul was, and there is a church right here. So you can see that Eresburg, now modern Obermarsburg, is definitely a great place for a hill fort. And there was the church that I pointed out. That's me right there, this guy in the blue shirt and blue jean shorts. But that's the probable former location of the Irminsul, where an 8th century church and cemetery were built at the highest point on top of the Eresburg. And Charlemagne built a church there and put a Christian cemetery there to end the heathen worship there. And here's a sign outside the Eresburg Stiftskirche claiming that the Irminsul, the Saxon temple, and the Saxon treasures once stood where the church is. So in the years 773 through 774, long story short, Charlemagne left Saxony in 772 after he destroyed Thunar's Well and destroyed the Irminsul, the two most holy sites in southern Saxony. Charlemagne pretty much felt that the Saxon gods were defeated, and thus he would go empire whoring by attacking Spain and trying to add Spain to his Reich, or to his empire. But as soon as Charlemagne left Saxony, the Saxon heathens did not keep their forced baptismal vows. They rose up and they retook the Irminsul and Hillfort Seaburg, Thunar's Well. They also tried in vain to attack the church at Fritzlar, where Thor's Oak of the Chatty once was destroyed. So basically, the area just to the south of Saxony lived a former heathen tribe known as the Chatty, but the Franks conquered them first, and they destroyed the Thunar's Oak, or Donar's Oak site. And after the Saxons freed Thunar's Well and the Irminsul site, they decided to liberate the Chatty. However, the Frankish writings record two angels who defeated the Saxon heathens in their entry for the year 773. But I think we all do agree that since Christian prayer doesn't alter the laws of nature, that this is Christian propaganda, that the Frankish armies were able to halt the Saxons from taking the site of the Chatti where Thunar's Oak was. So the Royal Frankish Annals state the following in their entry for the year 775, and this is a repeat of what I said earlier. While the King Charlemagne spent the winter at the villa of Quierzy, he decided to attack the treacherous and treaty-breaking tribe of the Saxons, and to persist in this war until they were either defeated and forced to accept the Christian religion, or be entirely exterminated. Basically what's going on is Charlemagne felt the Saxons were oath breakers because, he empire whores in Spain trying to defeat the Spanish to add them to their empire. And then the Saxons break their forced baptismal vows, which Charlemagne felt was breaking the treaty. And this is when he said, screw it, these guys are either going to accept these forced baptismal vows or they're going to be exterminated. And this is historical fact. And one of the other entries in 775, the pious and noble Lord King Charles, Charlemagne led an assembly at the village of Durin. From here he launched a campaign into Saxony and captured Hillfort Seaburg. He restored the hill fort of Eresburg and he came as far as the Weser at Brownsburg. So obviously it was of utmost importance for Charlemagne when he returned to Saxony in 775 to retake the Irminsul site as well as Thunar's Oak. Now, as I mentioned before, Charlemagne built churches. He built a church, which I do have pictures in my video on Thunar's Well. He built a church and laid a Christian graveyard there at the Thunar's Well site. He did the same at the Irminsul site because this is what Christians do. Their goal as Christians is to destroy heathenry. So this was an outrage in Saxony, obviously. So Saxony basically lost to Charlemagne's Christian armies, and they didn't really have a chance to win the Saxon Wars because Charlemagne had conquered much of Europe already, and the armies of Europe far outnumbered the armies in northern Germany. So the Saxons really did not have much of a choice. They didn't have much of a chance to really win this war. And I want to iterate, today northern Germany is 25 million people, but the whole nation of Germany is 82 million people. So there are more people in central and southern Germany than there are in northern. But today, the Saxon population, if you even call them that, because really they're Germans in North Germany, but the population of people in Old Saxony today outnumber the current population in Denmark, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden combined. And the Saxons were greater than all the Scandinavians back in the 8th century as well. So this is a big deal that Heathen Saxony fell. It really is, and it should be discussed more. Now, the year 776 through 781 was Charlemagne again, because, after Charlemagne wins in 775, in 776 he goes away empire whoring again in central and southern Italy and Spain. The Saxons retook the Irminsul site, but with the church there and a graveyard there, they didn't really try to rebuild the Irminsul this time. But they did occupy the castle that Charlemagne left there. Charlemagne had to return to Saxony. He made it to the Lippe before the Saxons knew that he left Italy. The Saxons were defeated, and Widukind, the Saxon hero, the leader of the heathen Saxons, fled to Denmark. Charlemagne built a new city, Karlstadt, which is basically Karl's city. Karl and Charles is the same. In 777, he called a national diet at Paderborn to integrate Saxony fully into the Frankish kingdom. Charlemagne once again had many large baptisms performed. Charlemagne brought in missionaries, monks from Christian England, to carry out the task of converting all Saxony and to build new churches. Charlemagne issued laws, the Lex Saxonum, which outlawed heathenry with capital punishment on anyone observing heathen practices. Those refusing to be baptized and those refusing to keep the Lenten fast were beheaded. His severe and uncompromising position, which earned him the title Butcher of the Saxons, caused his close advisor Alcuin of York, later abbot of Marmor Abbey, Tours, to object. In 779, Charlemagne went again into Saxony and conquered Eastphalia, Angria, and Westphalia. At a diet near Lippspringe, which is in Westphalia, he divided the land into missionary districts. He assisted in several mass baptisms in 780, and then he returned to Italy. So basically, Charlemagne spent 5 years pretty much in and out of Saxony trying to build churches, calling diets, bringing in missionaries. That was his goal. Now, I want to state that Paderborn is an old Saxon city, but it was really a city that the Franks built in Saxony. And the contemporary poet, when I mean contemporary, I mean he wrote it circa 800 AD. The poet of the Paderborn epic praises terror as a means of conversion. Here's what the poet wrote. What the contrary mind and perverse soul refuse to do with persuasion, let them leap to accomplish when compelled by fear. The Saxon Wars were really about force, to end heathen Saxony and to bring it into the Christian Frankish Empire and make the Franks and the Saxons one Christian people. That was the goal. Now, the year 782 through 785. So in 782, the peace ended. Why? What happened? Charlemagne reissued the Lex Saxonum. The Lex Saxonum are laws that outlawed Saxon heathenry and required beheading for people who returned to heathenry, didn't get baptized, didn't keep the Lenten fast, etc. The Lex Saxonum asked for all Saxon soothsayers who predicted the future to be given over to the church. Saxon heathens were forced to give to the church 1 out of every 60 people as a slave. This outraged the still heathen Saxons, who called upon Widukind to return from hiding in Denmark and to lead an uprising. Charlemagne was away again empire whoring, and Widukind led a well-planned guerrilla-style attack on 2 Frankish armies at night in the Sentel Mountains. Widukind's attack was so successful, few Franks were able to escape, and the rest were killed. Charlemagne lost a total of 20 nobles, which was something Charlemagne could not tolerate, as nobles would no longer wish to fight for Charlemagne unless he reacted strongly. So Widukind had the best victory ever. He literally wiped out 3 different Frankish forces, which is kind of like Arminius did in the same forest. Arminius fighting the Romans 7 centuries earlier. And after this great victory by the Saxon heathens in Widukind, the Royal Frankish Annals state that when the king heard of this disaster, he decided not to delay, but he made haste to gather an army and marched into Saxony. There he called to his presence the chiefs of the Saxons, as in all the Saxon nobles but Widukind, because the Saxon nobles were siding with Charlemagne from the beginning of the war. They wanted to make sure that they wouldn't be killed. They felt that they had no chance to beat the Franks. Widukind disagreed and decided to side with 100% of the Saxon peasants. But nonetheless, the Saxon nobles did hand over to Charlemagne 4,500 people, 4,500 soldiers that with Widukind fought against the Franks and defeated them. But they couldn't find Widukind because he fled to Nordmania, which is what the Franks called Denmark. But the others who had carried out his will and committed the crime, they delivered up to the king the number 4,500, and by the king's command they were all beheaded in one day upon the river Aller in the place called Verden. So today, this is what Verden looks like. Uh, in 1936, maybe it was 35, I don't remember right now, but Nazi Germany set up stones in Verden, 4,500 of them, to commemorate the Saxon fallen. And sadly, this became a Schutzstaffel meeting point. Schutzstaffel is the SS, so we're not fans of the SS. But nonetheless, the Germanic Reich, the Third Reich, certainly believed in genocide, just as the First Reich did. It's just the um, Third Reich killed Jews and Gypsies and others, and the First Reich killed heathens. So in the background is a picture of Verden. So this is true, and this is Notgeld from Germany from the year 1919, picture on the right. But 4,500 Saxons were beheaded for leaving their forced baptismal vows and defeating the Franks with Widukind. As usual, when the Christian armies of Europe returned with Charlemagne, the Saxons were no match, and thus 4,000 were beheaded. And oddly, or maybe I should say not surprisingly, depending which side of the fence you're on, the Saxons did not appreciate this. All the peasants, which is 99% of the Saxon population, were outraged and realized that Charlemagne was a Hitler type, a Schittler type, as I like to say, and they wanted none of it. At this point, I kind of compare the Massacre of Verden and even the destruction of the Irminsul to September 11th, because September 11th had such a huge impact on America that Americans were outraged. The same feeling of um, terror and disappointment and shock was on the heathen Saxons, with both the destruction of the Irminsul and Thunar's Well and the death of the 4,500. In 785, the Royal Frankish Annals claim that Widukind surrendered and chose to be baptized. A lot of scholars question this. I actually do not believe that he just freely surrendered and chose to be baptized. The Frankish Annals are propaganda. So what better story would it be to say, hey, he was baptized? But nonetheless, after his baptism, he disappears from the Frankish records for 3 centuries when false Christian legends that no one takes seriously arose saying that Widukind was a saint and he performed miracles. But, the Franks were silent that Widukind surrendered and he was baptized and then he's never mentioned again. Almost all, actually, I shouldn't say almost all, let's use the word all of Charlemagne's captured deposed leaders were either killed or spent the rest of their lives in a monastery. So I really think that those are the two options. Um, my personal belief is that Widukind was killed in battle in 785, but the Frankish sources do claim he surrendered. But I did want to point out that scholar Gerd Althoff has suggested that Widukind was imprisoned in the Bavarian monastery of Reichenau. The suggestion is based on a 9th century confraternity list from Reichenau that mentions an unordained monk named Widukind, who entered the monastery somewhere in the 780s and died after the list was drawn up in 825. Considering that the name Widukind was uncommon in the 9th century, this list could well have referred to the famous Germanic Saxon rebel leader, though it would mean that Widukind lived to an exceptionally old age. I believe Widukind was killed, but there is a scholarly view that Widukind spent the rest of his life captive in a monastery. And if that was the case, he probably was blinded or had his tongue cut out or something awful. This is Charlemagne we're talking about. Karl der Kleine. But we will never really know the fate of Widukind. Scholars are divided. Did he surrender and get imprisoned for the rest of his life, or did he die in battle for the freedom of the Saxons? But either option for Widukind is not a good one. Now let's discuss the end of the 33-year war. So the Saxons continued fighting for 19 years after Widukind was either killed or forcefully baptized or whatever, which tells me that, Widukind probably was killed because this didn't stop the Saxons from fighting. The Saxons continued to fight. The last rebellion in Westphalia, Saxony was in 792, and the Saxons there were crushed. There are 4 separate deportations of 10,000 Saxons recorded in the Frankish sources between the years 792 and 804, and the other Saxon regions did continue to resist. Einhard wrote circa 820 the following in his Vita Caroli Magni, which is the life of Karl the Great. The war that lasted so many years was at length ended by the Saxons, acceding to the terms offered by the king, that's Charlemagne, which were renunciation of their national religious customs and the worship of devils, acceptance of the sacraments of the Christian faith and religion, and union with the Franks to form one people. In the end, the Lex Saxonum was still in force. It was first written in the year 785. It was rewritten a few times with the laws only changing slightly. The harsh capital's punishments all remained. The fact that Charlemagne ruthlessly killed Saxons and imposed the death penalty for not obeying the Lenten fast in Lex Saxonum, Law 4. The death to any Saxon for burying ashes of a body in a heathen pyre, Lex Saxonum 7. Death to any Saxon who scorns baptism and remains a heathen, Lex Saxonum Law 8. Forced tithes on all Saxons in money, land, and humans as slaves to work the church land, Lex Saxonum Law 17. Forced church attendance to all Saxons on the Lord's Day, Lex Saxonum Law 18. Forcing all Saxon infants to be baptized, Lex Saxonum Law 19. Forced Saxon burials in Christian cemeteries, full bone burials. You had to bury the body, you could not burn it. So these laws, I could have read all the laws that Charlemagne instituted. He did over 30 of them. They all clearly show how evil Charlemagne was and the Christian nature of the Saxon Wars. Well, hey, thank you for listening to this rather long video on the Saxon Wars. But please feel free to read all our free blog articles at www.aldsidu.com. All the blog articles are at aldsidu.com/blog. Please join us on Facebook, Aldsidu, Saxon Heathenry, and of course, like and subscribe. Thank you so much.